Hi folks, this is Karl-James Langford. This is my video log on special, unique places of Britain. Well, have managed to get the video logs in any type of order at this minute. Lots happening. But I decided that as part of my series about unusual sites in Britain, I've already looked at the Roman baths at Bath. It's an unusual site because it's fairly unique, and the white horses are unique, and that's what we're looking at today. So this is something that I've actually taught in the last week, so not up to date. I've got loads of videos to put on here. So the white horses of Wiltshire, Uffington and other parts of Britain, a great anathema, a great mystery associated with them. Wiltshire itself is dominated by these white horses. Many still present. Many have disappeared, have been shown on television a number of times. I can remember Anneka Rice's part of Anneka Rice's challenge in the 1980s with her strident above the white horse, trying to whiten it as part of a series. But the most famous white horse by far is the Uffington white horse. We'll have a look at these white horses in no particular order. I believe that lots of the ones that you see today are near or close to very old white horses. The Westbury, the Uffington, the Tan horse and others originally might have a great date, and of course Uffington's been dated by Oxford Archaeological Unit to over 3,000 years ago. So the origins of what you see now are mainly based around horses that have been reshaped or recarved in the past 200-300 years. As I've already said, existing white horses may have been on these hillsides. Colour white is important, always has been to our ancestors, and it is now in the sense of the Christian church as well. Lots of these white horses you can see directly in front of you, but from sort of angles you can't. More into that in later videos. The first horse we look at today, in the typical style it's referred to as a geoglyph, is Alton Barnes. I love the Alton Barnes when I visited it a few years ago. The Alton Barnes horse, as you can see, is something that was relatively shaped in more recent years. There's some debate whether it was shaped in around the 1770s or in 1812, commissioned by Mr. Pyle. A wonderful story associated with this Alton Barnes horse and this is in the heart of Wiltshire, I would say. Mr. Pyle paid £20 to a journeyman painter known as John Thorne Jack the Painter, paying him to design it and to cut it out, on subcontracting the work to a certain John Harvey of Stanton St. Bernard. Just as the work was being completed, Thorne ran off. Apparently, a few years later, he was hung for crimes nothing to do with stealing the money from Mr. Pyle. Mr. Pyle had to fork out lots of money. Then again, the same Jack the Painter was also hung in 1776, so it may be thought that if this is the same guy, then Alton Barnes may have been carved somewhat earlier. So there's lots of mistaken identity associated with this white horse, but a little bit more detail coming back to interesting bits and pieces. Well, Mr. Pyle, if this is believed to be 1812, it slowly started to disappear like lots of these white horses. By about 1866 it was re-scoured. White horses would have to be scoured every few years to keep the undergrowth away, and it can be said that geophysics and varying aerial photography techniques might actually find these, because the grass itself would just lightly cover them and bury them, the earlier horses. Well, this one itself, by about the 2000s, had more or less completely disappeared. Not that it was being scoured every year, but 150 tons of fresh white chalk were added to it. Can be seen from the side of the road. Alton Barnes is in a wonderful landscape, Pewsey, looks towards a Pewsey Valley really, and it can be seen for some distance. This white horse itself has a wonderful tradition associated with it, and I think traditions are very important to the meaning of these white horses. Much we've lost in our landscape, particularly when you think about something like Avebury. We don't really know what Avebury's about. It's nothing to do with Druids and fictitious Celts. But some traditions have survived associated with these white horses that really predate the rescouring and recreation of these with Uffington being an exception, rescouring in the past 200-300 years and reshaping them. One associated story, which is completely non-Christian, tradition of lighting the white horses to mark special occasions, these horses being lit by candlelight, winter solstice. From the 2000s, again, reinstating that tradition. Where that come from, we don't know. And why these are horses, we don't really know. Lots of these are on sort of high points, straddling towards the top of the hill more than anything. Anyway, the next one that we curiously go on to is the Broadtown white horse. Broadtown on Marlborough Road, again, all these in Wiltshire, well, other than the Uffington one and the later ones that we don't have images for. This is believed to have been shaped sometime in the 1860s. 1864 it was recut itself. One thing that can be said about lots of these reshaping of the white horses, they've lost their shape. I've just had a discussion with my partner Michelle about Alton Barnes, not Alton Barnes, Carnabbas. Carnabbas itself, because it's been reshaped and changed, has become mutated and altered, and lots of these modern white horses themselves, because they've been created in recent times, they become mutated and altered, where the Uffington has kept its shape, its alignment over the past 3,000 years. That's very interesting. The skill of creating the white horses in the past has very much been lost. So when we've recreated them, like this one at Broadtown, they lose their shape quite rapidly, a skill lost in the past. And very much that lots of these are white horses. Carnabbas, the Willington Man, the figures of men, but most of them are undoubtedly horses, and that should be remembered. Broadtown white horse itself, it's, when you think about this one, it was lost, it was completely sort of forgotten about, and it was reshaped and rescoured in the 1990s and 2004. There's another version of the original Broadtown white horse, however, but that's another story altogether. This is not one that I visited, and excuse the coughing as well. The next one is Churhill. Now this was the first one I'd ever seen when I visited the landscape, because we'd had a trip to Silbury that year, and suddenly as you left Silbury and you went in a western direction, you saw the Churhill, and it suddenly came upon you just as you looked over on the left in a cleft. And Churhill could be a really ancient horse, and Churhill is overlooked by a hill fort, the Oldbury Castle Hill Fort. There are associations with lots of these sites and hill forts. The Churhill horse that you can see today was recut in 1780. Story associated with the Churhill white horse is the work of a Dr. Alsop of Caen, sometimes referred to as the Mad Doctor. He is said to have directed the marking out of the white horse from a distance, calling instructions through a megaphone. One thing that can be said about these white horses, their ancestors didn't have megaphones. When you think about the Uffington horse, it could only be seen from a great distance, so there was no sense of megaphones and marking them out. So our ancestors not only knew how to stabilize these sites, like Uffington, and to try and keep their shape, but they also knew how to mark them out in situ, which is a feat in itself, because when you go to many of these white horses and you're actually on them, you can't make out the shape. So our ancestors knew more than we know today. They didn't need megaphones. Unusual thing about this white horse itself, it had glass bottles as a centerpiece for its eyes, gradually being taken over the years and reshaped. This white horse itself has had to be replaced. Its chalk itself re-whitened, new chalk placed there. Again, 160 tons added in August 2002. Scouring was something our ancestors would have done because it was part of their understanding of the gentle, wonderful landscape that is our great land. The old divided white horse itself has long since disappeared, probably shaped in 1845 or before by a local shoemaker known as Snobs. Local translation of the word for snobs is snob, which basically means the shoemaker was a bit of a snob, but alas, his horse was lost. A new horse was created in 1997 and renamed the New Devices horses. These horses are not whitened and kept up and kept in the sense of landscape. Their sense of tradition is undoubtedly lost. The next horse we look at now is the Hackpen horse. Very interesting horse, no doubt. There she is. The Hackpen white horse itself, very interesting little horse indeed. His origins are uncertain. Recut or recreated in 1838 to commemorate the coronation of Queen Victoria. So we get a link to why these people today are creating them. Maybe that gives us a clue in the past. On a shallow slope, this one, but can be fairly easily seen. Hackpen itself has been cleaned quite recently. And Hackpen itself is one of these white horses that can be single-handedly cleaned up and lightly whitened within just the shape of a day, as experimented in 2003 by one of the local villagers. Now, all of these white horses are a bit of an anathema associated with them. The next one we look at is known as the Ham Hill white horse, that we don't have an illustration of at this present moment, but the Ham Hill one is on a bit of a steep slope, and there were once two there, and it's said that it definitely existed before 1877. Lots of changes with this one. Trying to understand it is very awkward. So as we get something quite awkward, let's chaps move on. The Marlborough white horse. Sorry for being a bit of an inventory, but the Marlborough white horse is one of those odd white horses in that it was probably created anew, because Pewsey had its white horse, Uffington had its white horse, other localities had their white horses. So a little bit of a nice little story here. The white horse was cut in 1804 by pupils of a boys' school run by a Mr. Greasley. He ran a school known as Greasley's Academy at Marlborough, not Marlborough College. The horse was designed by a pupil called William Canning, and it was scoured every year until the death of Mr. Greasley in 1830, and it became neglected. But by about 1860 it was in a bit of a reasonable condition. In 1873 a pupil of the former Mr. Greasley's school decided that it was his job to scour it again, keeping the link in that sense of place which these white horses are very much about. But unfortunately Marlborough is a very difficult white horse to keep whited. And even in 2001, when it was restored, it only took a year for it to be sort of unwhitened and sort of a bit dishevelled. And somewhat it's the tradition of preserving the white horse at Marlborough is now undertaken by the local scout troop and other local organisations. Quite sweet. Now, we move on now, and we move on to the Pewsey white horse. Now, there's actually two horses at Pewsey, and the original white horse at Pewsey has now since gone. It's believed that the original white horse at Pewsey was originally shaped sometime in 1785. Regular festivities, but they were not kept up because the local landowner didn't like it. Maybe he thought it was rather paganisque. By about 1800, the white horse completely disappeared and lost in the contours of the landscape, as these white horses just obey the disappearance, and that's somewhat of their mystery. The new white horse at Pewsey, which you can see today, is quite dominating and of the landscape, and in the tradition of being created as a hill carving, a geoglyph in 1937, commemorating the great King George VI and his coronation at such troubled times. Maybe giving you a clue to our link with the past and what these actual white horses dictate to us. A sense of meaning more than anything more or less than that. Now, this next one is a little bit of a sweet one. It's known as the Rockley white horse. It's appeared and disappeared. We don't know who or when or what. It looks fairly modern, but then again we don't know who created it, and now it's no longer really to be seen. The Rockley white horse is a discovery in 1948 on Down Farm, a Rockley Down, and when it was being ploughed, the plough brought to the surface a massive chalk in a pattern not identifiable on the ground. Local shepherds said that they had long been aware of a discoloration of the grass in that area. Aerial photographs were taken and the chalk was revealed to be the infilling of a previously unknown white horse. In the course of turning over the soil, the plough had moved the chalk and you could see it on the ground. As you can see this illustration here, it was a well-proportioned horse, trotting and running position. Position chosen for the Rockley horse is rather an odd one. Rockley Down is a long, steep slope, which would seem to be an ideal site for a white horse, but the actual site is actually on more or less the top of the ridge, not really seen, or maybe that's why it disappeared. Great mystery is that it's become lost again, and the white horse dispersed, like many of these lost, dishevelled white horses. One story like that is the Tan Hill white horse. There was once a white horse, or possibly a donkey, on Tan Hill. So recently there had been little evidence of the existence of the figure. However, Kathleen Wiltshire in Wiltshire's Folklore in 1975 postulated a white horse, or a donkey, In her words, and a small donkey is still partly visible on Town Hill, though the legs have become quite overgrown. The shepherds call this Donkey Hill, and one told me he had eaten bread and cheese on its back scores of times as it's placed. This pony or donkey is 75 feet from nose to tail, which stretches down much like that of the Uffington horse, and its head is very large. The reference to the figure as a donkey seems to derive solely from the size of the head, but as hill figures are not noted for their anatomical accuracy, it seems uncertain whether it was indeed a donkey or whether it might have been another one of those horses. Also, on another note, it's another bit of a mystery here as well. A miniature stone circle of 9 upright sarsen stones, about 4 feet in height, in the centre of which a prostrate stone about the length of a man. Searches had since been made of the area, but no trace of either the stone circle or the hill figure could be found, lost in the notes and words of Wiltshire's folklore. But there is an associated hill fort there, Rybury Camp, that association with the past and these figures. In February 2002, however, inquiries were made and the stone circle was found, and other people confirmed that they had seen the white horse. But again, a great mystery from this image, tucked away amongst that grass across the down of the mountain side. But one interesting thing that must be said here, as we understand it a little bit more, it is perhaps worth noting that there has been some suggestion that the horse might have been cut and maintained by visitors to Town Hill, a sheep trading fair and accompanying entertainments fair held on Town Hill, August the 6th and 7th, from at least the 1400s until it was stopped in 1932. What a tragedy, like the loss of the fair at Uffington. The location of the horse turns out to be very near the site of this fair, which leads new credence to this idea in the hill fort as well. And if the horse began to fall into disrepair as a cause of the fair ceasing, then it is not surprising that it was overgrown and lost in time forever. The Westbury horse itself, the Branton white horse. Westbury is a bit of a thing, really. Can be seen dominating the landscape. And it's said that the white horse that you see today, dating to 1742, was once overlying a much greater horse of great antiquity. The earliest mention of an early horse there, further observations on the white horse and other antiquities in Berkshire by a certain Reverend Wyse, published in 1742. The white horse of the title at Westbury. He relates that he was told by local people that it had been cut in the memory of persons still living or who had recently died, or, then again, as I feel and lots of other people feel, that the one at Westbury is a great horse, a great date like Uffington, given a great memory to those people of the past that we aspire to, and their memory is etched beneath the grass there somewhere. And the great horse that you see today, recreated, and the new Westbury horse, is a memory to that ever-evolving landscape of great memory. In 1778, Mr. George Gee, who was steward to Lord Abingdon, had the horse recut to a design nearer to its present-day appearance. But it became misshapen because of the skill lost of our ancestors. And being that the shape was restored in 1873, edging stones placed in to hold the chalk which was not been seen on other white horses. The shape of the present horse dates from this restoration. Alas, early in the 1900s, concrete was added to hold the edging stones in place, a crime to these white horses, and the great skill of our ancestors who knew how to create white horses that could last for thousands of years. Late in the 1950s, it was decided that it would considerably reduce the maintenance costs if the horses were covered in concrete. This work was carried out and the concrete was repeated in 1995, and then it was painted white. What do we know, eh? Our ancestors knew how to white these horses. Unfortunately, this video is a bit long, but got to say that the Uffington horse, as you can see in these images, is a great horse. We know it dates from over 3,000 years ago, from new dating techniques, which I'm sure we'll visit at a later date. 374 feet in length can be seen from the train as you go from London to Wales and Wales to London. Something that I always remember from when I was a child. Uffington is one of those sites that is dominated by a hill fort as well, and there's also various legends associated with it. And one last thing, Uffington, once every 7 years from at least the 1677 it said, until the late 1700s, a midsummer scouring festival was held, during which the local people cleaned the chalk, loved the horse, and enjoyed a 3-day celebratory feast within the hill fort. The festival, which must have ancient origins, lapsed, and now the horse, in more recent times, is cleaned by members of English heritage. Picturesque, great horse, great memory to our ancestors, and a great thought of our past, and a great link not to be lost. And just quickly, non-Wiltshire white horses, yes, they do exist. Even with one in Wales, one in Tyne and Wear. New ones in Folkestone in Kent from 2002. Several in Sussex, even one in Aberdeen, Scotland. One in Dorset as well. The one in Wales is associated with the Penelta Pit. Pitstone Hill, white horse in Buckinghamshire, may have existed beyond 1580, so it's got some wonderful date there. Another one in Sheffield, another one in Surrey as well, more recent dates, another one in Yorkshire, but to end with, Whitesford white horse in Cambridgeshire. September 2004, the skill of the archaeologist. Whilst aerial photography of the area was being taken by the Winsford Society Archive project, a crop mark was noticed, which had the shape similar to that of the Uffington white horse. It is not yet known whether this is the remains of a white horse at the spot, or some kind of particular anathema in the soil, further to be investigated. But if this one at Cambridgeshire is of great date, they don't only exist in Oxfordshire and Wiltshire, but elsewhere. And another one in Hampshire that is more of whitewashed flints embedded in the soil, but still a geoglyph. This is Karl-James Langford. Hopefully you've enjoyed my little look at white horses. Why not come along to one of my classes sometime? Thank you very much.